welcome everyone to this final presentation session for ARCOM 2021. The session is themed as information management, and I think, as you'll see from the papers, the theming is taking information in its broadest context. So we're going to be looking at blockchain ecosystems, and then a complex paper of collaborative risk management in design of green buildings, and then finally a paper using actor network theory to look at economic feasibility studies. So I'm going to move straight away to the presentation of the first paper. Please do put questions up in the chat box as we go along. So here we go.
Hello, welcome to our ARCOM presentation. Our paper is on blockchain ecosystem in construction, open or closed innovation. My name is Eleni Papadonikolaki, and I've worked on this with colleagues from University of Huddersfield, Jönköping University, and Högskolan Gävle. So in the next 10 minutes, I will be discussing about digital innovation, and in particular blockchain as the evidence of digital innovation for this research, and then I'll explain the research setting, and I will discuss our findings on open or closed blockchain innovation ecosystems and setting some outlook for the future. So we've seen in the recent years an increase in digitalization, in digital technologies development, and also data capture and analysis. And this has happened due to many new devices, but also better internet connectivity, better and faster computer infrastructure, and in general connected technologies. But of course, we know that digitalization, especially in construction, is very low. So from McKinsey, a digitalization index is very low in terms of assets, usage, and labor. In this research, we'll be looking at digital innovation as an innovation which has implications spilled across many different disciplines and related to very distributed agency, many different actors working, and the digital interactions become less and less predefined. And on the other hand side, in construction industry, we have a very fragmented structure, very hierarchical with many tiers, which is governed by mistrust. So essentially our research gap is formulated around the structure and the nature of digital ecosystems, and we use blockchain as an example. So blockchain as a digital ecosystem has seen a lot of applications in sectors such as finance, logistics, and healthcare. For example, finance with regards to utility and tokenization, in logistics with regards to transparency and traceability of supply chains, and healthcare with regards to better data management. Blockchain is a distributed ledger technology where transactions are recorded in different places at the same time across a network of computers. This is why the concept of blockchain is very related to the concept of an ecosystem. And essentially, blockchain creates some block structures of valid transaction data. So whenever we have a transaction, then the transaction request is transmitted to a network. The network can validate this transaction, and the transaction is added as a block and chained to other blocks, and then the transaction is confirmed. Main principles of blockchain ecosystems are the decentralization, immutability, reliability, and proof of work. And we can understand from this figure that there are many different nodes in this ecosystem, like the computers who are validating, the miners who are essentially making sure that the process is followed, and the different blocks chained in the process. So this is a very basic visualization of how the blocks are created, are confirmed between this network of computers, and then chained to the blockchain. Now, of course, there are different types of blockchain. We're discussing about public and private blockchain with regards to the access. So you can understand that in public blockchain, the access is easy. No one is checking who will be participating. And then we have different types of blockchain with relation to the validation, for example, permissionless and permission blockchains, which relates to the governance, who is setting the rules of the blockchain and how it works. Now, in our research, the main research question was how open or closed is the blockchain innovation ecosystem in construction? And we used qualitative methods, and we collected data from interviews across a global sample, and we analyzed it with thematic analysis and deductive coding. Our selection criteria for the interviewees had to do with professionals in the industry who were familiar with blockchain, they were engaged in digital construction, they had professional experience in construction or technology, and half of them actually had coding experience with blockchain. Now, for this thematic analysis and deductive coding, we used open innovation theory and essentially the 6 open innovation principles. So here on the left-hand side, I have highlighted with bold the main keywords related to the expertise that open innovation uses outside the boundaries of the firm. External R&D, profiting from innovations that they haven't originated, creating business models with the aim to get first to the market, and this might be by using both internal and external ideas, and profiting not only from the firm IP, intellectual property, but also from IP from other companies, either buying that or using open standards. And at the same time, our rationale was that blockchain, because of these characteristics of public, private blockchain, permissionless, it's a mainstream technology for open innovation ecosystem because it's already very networked and there are a lot of communities supporting that. Transaction is added as a block and chained to other blocks, and then the transaction is confirmed. Main principles of blockchain ecosystems are the decentralization, immutability, reliability, and proof of work. And we can understand from this figure that there are many different nodes in this ecosystem, like the computers who are validating, the miners who are essentially making sure that the process is followed, and the different blocks chained in the process. So this is a very basic visualization of how the blocks are created, are confirmed between this network of computers and then chained to the blockchain. Now, of course, there are different types of blockchain. We're discussing about public and private blockchain with regards to the access. So you can understand that in public blockchain, the access is easy. No one is checking who will be participating. And then we have different types of blockchain with relation to the validation, for example, permissionless and permission blockchains, which relates to the governance, who is setting the rules of the blockchain and how it works. Now, in our research, the main research question was how open or closed is the blockchain innovation ecosystem in construction? And we used qualitative methods, and we collected data from interviews across a global sample, and we analyzed it with thematic analysis and deductive coding. Our selection criteria for the interviewees had to do with professionals in the industry who were familiar with blockchain, they were engaged in digital construction, they had professional experience in construction or technology, and half of them actually had coding experience with blockchain. Now, for this thematic analysis and deductive coding, we used open innovation theory and essentially the 6 open innovation principles. So here on the left-hand side, I have highlighted with bold the main keywords related to the expertise that open innovation uses outside the boundaries of the firm, external R&D, profiting from innovations who are essentially making sure that the process is followed.
Excuse me, is anyone
making sure that the process is followed.
Everybody, just a quick note, please. If you are stopping on starting the video, for those with permission to do so, it will affect everybody watching. It's not just on your screen. Someone has just stopped the video. I'm going to start it again.
Process is followed, and the different blocks chained in the process. So this is a very basic visualization of how the blocks are created, are confirmed between this network of computers and then chained to the blockchain. Now, of course, there are different types of blockchain. We're discussing about public and private blockchain with regards to the access. So you can understand that in public blockchain, the access is easy. No one is checking who will be participating. And then we have different types of blockchain with relation to the validation, for example, permissionless and permission blockchains, with relates to the governance, who is setting the rules of the blockchain and how it works. Now, in our research, the main research question was how open or closed is the blockchain innovation ecosystem in construction? And we used qualitative methods, and we collected data from interviews across a global sample, and we analyzed it with thematic analysis and deductive coding. Our selection criteria for the interviewees had to do with professionals in the industry who were familiar with blockchain, they were engaged in digital construction, they had professional experience in construction or technology, and half of them actually had coding experience with blockchain. Now, for this thematic analysis and deductive coding, we used open innovation theory and essentially the 6 open innovation principles. So here on the left-hand side, I have highlighted with bold the main keywords related to the expertise that open innovation uses outside the boundaries of the firm, external R&D, profiting from innovations that they haven't originated, creating business models with the aim to get first to the market, and this might be by using both internal and external ideas, and profiting not only from the firm IP, intellectual property, but also from IP from other companies, either buying that or using open standards. And at the same time, our rationale was that blockchain, because of these characteristics of public, private blockchain, permissionless, it's a mainstream technology for open innovation ecosystem because it's already very networked and there are a lot of communities supporting that. And blockchain can stimulate open innovation because, of course, there is this shared value that's created from these community members. However, on the other hand side, this openness not only encourages very wide participation, which helps, but also perhaps might stifle some commercialization of open source ideas. Now, from our data, you can see here on the left-hand side, we have these main codes of the open innovation principles, such as human resources, R&D, commercialization, business models, idea creation, and intellectual property. And in the second column from the left, you can see that in human resources and idea creation, all the interviewees agreed about how the open innovation principles are applied in the industry. However, where the situation became more complicated with our data analysis was with regards to business models and intellectual property. There we understood that our experts, giving us their experience from the industry, they essentially describe the industry as an industry which it's not very open to changing the business model to align with technology and is then using more traditional business models. And on the other hand side, construction companies, they lack a culture of data sharing and they lack a culture of using others companies' IPs. However, on the other hand side, most of them agreed that commercialization of new ideas from blockchain was very positive, especially in the pre-competitive stage of the innovation. Now, our key findings from this research is that open innovation in construction is largely misunderstood. This paper is the first, to the best of our knowledge, the first research on using open innovation in construction, and we realized that construction sector essentially is organized around closed innovation instead. The traditional business models of the sector do not really allow for knowledge spillover effects and learning from others and using each other's IP or developments. On the other hand side, we identified some emerging new topics and ideas. For example, we saw from our research that a lot of the interviewees and data discussed a lot about the role of the SMEs, which becomes a more improved, a more protected role, and the SMEs gain a lot of visibility in systems where blockchain has been used, especially for payment and financial transactions. And on the other hand side, the role of the government and the large contractors might become more significant in the future, as they might take on an orchestrator role of these closed in construction or semi-open innovation ecosystems in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. So if you could just put your camera on, we can move to asking some questions. Excellent. Yes, sorry about the technical problems in that. I think the one thing we realize is the technology is never perfect. So maybe this is one of the problems of blockchain. You know, it doesn't require perfect technology. Have we any questions, Vivien?
I'm not seeing any questions come up in the chat so far.
Do you want to ask one, Vivien?
I do, actually. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks so much, Eleni, for the really interesting presentation. Firstly, a point of clarification, and this could be just because of the, the sort of the loop. So I might have missed something. So I just want to clarify, please. What is the definition of open innovation versus closed innovation?
Yeah, thanks, Vivien. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's nodding, so that's fine. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I didn't see any of the presentation. Perhaps my internet was very slow, so I didn't see any of it. Yeah, so definitely there were some discussions about open innovation there. So what differentiates open innovation from closed innovation is that with open innovation, we're looking at innovation happening also outside the boundaries of the firm. So this is where the topics and the themes around ecosystem, they become very valuable, because in an open innovation paradigm, innovation contributions can happen from outside the boundaries of the firm, either from ideas or IPs, IP that companies can buy from other firms, and being able to commercialize that.
So were you, so thank you for the clarification. So my question is, were you looking at specific usages of blockchain in projects or potential users? You talked about, yeah, so how were you exploring this idea of blockchain in projects? Were you talking about potential users? Or was that part of was that the assumption going in, or was that part of your finding?
Yeah, so we had different interviewees coming from across different aspects of the construction project lifecycle, and from very wide backgrounds. We weren't doing a case study research, if you like. So we weren't looking at specific use cases and applications, but we wanted to understand the conditions of an ecosystem organization, especially with regards to blockchain, because blockchain, it's a technology that has good links to the open innovation paradigm, because it relies also to an ecosystem of different computers and different functions across the mining and the consensus mechanisms of the technology. And at the same time, because there are open source opportunities with blockchain, this makes it an ideal technology as well to study the phenomenon, because what we were trying to do was not to provide use cases. There are a lot of use cases and there are a lot of papers on use cases of blockchain, but we were trying to understand the industry structure and the nature of such a system, especially in construction, which is typically more closed with regards to sharing information among firms and commercializing from each other's ideas. And the findings of the paper also justified that. So they stressed that although there is an awareness about the technology, the companies in construction, they're not ready yet to leverage open innovation and to collaborate to create solutions together or to create more open communities.
Okay, thanks for that. Really interesting.
I think we're going to have to call the questions to an end now, because I think we're running to time. So thank you very much, Eleni, and we look forward to seeing how this project develops. Maybe you'll come to Glasgow next year and we can hear more about it. So I'm now going to move on to our next presenter, who is Lungie Maseko. We're going to look at a paper about collaborative risk management within the design phase of green buildings.
Good day. My name is Lungie Maseko, presenting the topic Collaborative Risk Management within the Design Phase of Green Buildings. The presentation will follow this outline. Construction projects are becoming ever more ambitious in terms of complexity of structures, design requirements, the information flow, the influence of stakeholders, and the extent to which technology is integrated into buildings. And this is particularly true in the growing green building sector, where the design philosophy is holistic and the buildings are best designed through collaborative practices. Because of this holistic approach, the management of these projects has become increasingly integrated, as can be seen in areas such as design management. However, risk management has taken little account of these emergent interdisciplinary and iterative trends in the building design process. And this has actually led to poor risk management outcomes, because traditional risk management practices still rely on allocating risks to specific individual entities. And this kind of practice does not accommodate collaborative arrangements. Going into our literature review, green building designs are complex undertakings that have actually given rise to interconnected stakeholders, which has led to interdependent tasks, hence the high dependence on information, which causes iterations. And all this has resulted in inseparable risks. Inseparable risks are actually risks that cannot be transferred or allocated to an individual, but would have to be shared between parties and can only be resolved or mitigated through collaboration. This then requires a collaborative risk management system, which will focus on integrating risk management with existing design management processes. This change from traditional risk management to collaborative risk management is surely loaded with uncertainties, which include risk sharing among all stakeholders and actually their response to this cultural shift. Collaborative Collaborative risk management is about the dynamic management of risk, which plays a major role in achieving value for money and cost efficiency in designing complex projects. This dynamic approach implies that the identification and assessment of design risk, along with the response to it, is actually performed proactively and jointly throughout the design phase, making collaborative risk management a management that is keenly aware of the intricate connections of risk variables among complex systems and processes. But complex systems deal with interdependencies, which most of the traditional tools, such as a critical path method, cannot actually determine because of their linear workflow in nature. Thus, the use of the dependency structure matrices in this research. The methodology used for this research was a multiple case study approach, as it obtains data in a real-life environment showing different perspectives and was able to provide a basis to apply solutions to situations. This data was gathered using semi-structured interviews to actually obtain in-depth knowledge where participants were asked about their stakeholder techniques on carrying out inseparable risks, as well as their options and suggestions on CRM processes in green projects. The case studies were completed projects. In this project, the various stakeholders reflected on how they manage inseparable risks and how CRM was used to facilitate the processes. And projects in the design phase, here the design team is still engaging with the risks as well as with inseparable risks. All these green projects are certified to address environmental and sustainability initiatives. The method used to analyze the data was the multiple domain matrix, which includes the dependency structure matrix and the domain mapping matrix. These matrices assist in mapping out the interdependencies between design tasks, the interactions of stakeholders, and the exchange of information from design tasks and risks. They further identify the optimal sequence of tasks, risk interactions, and iterations across domains, so to minimize the number of task dependencies. So the combination of these matrices actually provides valuable and structured information regarding the intended designs between different stakeholders. To understand current risk-sharing practices and the way inseparable risks can be managed in collaborative circumstances, a DMM matrix was used to plot the information gathered from the interviews, and it mapped out the interdependencies between stakeholders, their tasks, and where the risk lies. And in this matrix, interdependencies of varying strengths are actually identified across activities and by clustering. This DMM is used to identify also areas between tasks and stakeholders that actually require a high level of coordination and integration. This attests that CRM requires knowledge creation, not just knowledge application. Although collaboration is the main goal in green projects, the silo patterns still exist between different disciplines, and this creates a significant barrier to identifying inseparable risks. So, to overcome the traditional attitudes to design, which are discipline-orientated, more collaborative systems are needed that have synchronized decisions, shared information, and more contractual knowledge Also, in order to achieve equitable risk sharing, CRM aims to integrate and harness collective skills of all stakeholders by actually delivering superior value in green projects, and this is done by considering different risk management practices. In conclusion, the application of the DSM, the DMM, and the MDM methodologies is actually still limited in CRM practices of designing green buildings. But it is needed as it will utilize the best in-class expertise and knowledge collaboratively, and therefore decisions on sharing risk will actually rely on stakeholders having to assign risk prudently by means of collective thinking using matrix-based analysis. So, collaborative risk management is presented here as an approach that will aid the construction industry to improve its risk management practices, as a solution that emphasizes equitable and balanced risk sharing among contracting stakeholders, as well as it will help in eliminating improper or unfavorable risk sharing outcomes, which actually have resulted in cost and time overruns and undoubtedly in legal disputes. Thank you.
David, you're muted. You're still muted.
It's moved down to the bottom of the screen. It was on the top right before, but it now moved. Yes, and thank you for that. And Lungie, could you just tell us where you are at the moment, Lungie, so we get some, some collective spirit here?
I'm in Johannesburg.
You're in Johannesburg. Yes, we're all a long distance away. Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So, have we any questions, Vivien? No.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box.
Maybe if I could come in a little bit, because I think there's been quite a bit of work about sharing of risk, mainly in sort of integrated project delivery type projects. One issue that often comes up is that people who are experts retain a liability. Therefore, you can't, in that sense, share the risk of your own liability. But if you're doing something that's different, you're always going to have more liability, if you understand what I mean. So how do you think we could deal with this differential risk that different people have in green design projects?
Well, it has really come out in the findings because with different stakeholders, they handle risk differently and everybody prefers their own way. And trying to share risk has been really difficult. And some of the respondents highlighted the professional indemnity as well as being a problem, because if you then claim, you cannot claim for everyone. You have to claim for yourself, I'd say. So it has really it's really an area that needs to be looked at more, and which I'm planning on to, and actually going into the professional indemnity side of it, because it is really a problem.
Yeah. May I make a suggestion that it's quite interesting in the UK? We've started to use something called integrated project insurance, where an external insurer puts a risk value on something, and therefore everybody pays the premium to the insurance company. There've been a couple of projects.
Would that be just for a particular project?
Yes, unfortunately, it is for a particular project. Therefore, you have to have an insurance risk assessor, which involves both technical and financial risk, by the way. I'm sure you would find it interesting to read about it.
Yeah.
Because it enabled people to make decisions together because they were sharing the risk, or they'd all paid in to share the risk, shall we say, including the client, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry about hogging that. Vivien, have you got any questions?
I think that was a really interesting discussion. I just have a quick question about the matrix that you presented, where you were looking at you were saying that the matrix shows how some of these risk items, I guess, have interdependencies or clusters of interdependencies. Is that correct?
Yes. It's a dependency structure matrix, so it is about interdependencies. And when plotting the information from the interviews, it then showed the clusters, which becomes the area where the stakeholders or the project stakeholders can actually look at.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never seen interdependencies presented in a matrix form like this before. It's really helpful to see how two factors are interdependent. My question then to you is, have you considered flow-on effects? So, for example, if A influences B and B influences C, does that mean that A also influences C?
Yes.
And have you thought of maybe how you might explore that or illustrate that, or is that significant at all to your research?
I'd say with interdependencies, it somehow relates to the flow. The flows that you're talking about, because from A can interlink with B and C, and D can just link to A alone. So those kind of flows are also the flows that part of the structure and relations of inseparable risks.
So yeah, that would be I think that might be interesting to explore, especially if you are trying to identify for the client or for the person managing the risk where these interdependencies are, because just focusing on one set of interdependency might then neglect how that impacts on something else, that unintended consequences, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and I think those feedback loops that may result from those multiple interdependencies could be quite complicated. And yes, again, why some people don't like doing anything different is because of the complexity of the situation.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions? I'm conscious of time. We want to finish not long after 3:45 because we've got our final session at 4. So maybe I'll just thank you, Lungie, for a very interesting presentation. And again, we look forward to having you return with more information and even seeing you in Glasgow next year.
Yes, we'll do. Thanks, David. Thanks, Vivien.
Thanks very much.
Right, so we're going to move on to our third presentation, and let me go back to the slide here, and we're going to look at the actant influencing of successful compilation of economic feasibility studies. So let me just play the video, and if you can confirm, Vivien, that you can.
Hello everyone, my name is Rolien Terblanche and I will be presenting the paper Actants Influencing the Successful Compilation of Economic Feasibility Studies, the Quantity Surveyors Perspective. My co-authors are Professor Ruud and Dr. Vosloo. The scope of the study lies within the quantity surveying profession, also known as cost engineers or value engineers or construction economists, depending on the location. As part of their services, they prepare economic feasibilities and cost estimates, among other services. The scope of the study is further narrowed to the commercial sector due to the sector being concerned with economic success. If you look at the project phases on the slide, in South Africa there are 6 project phases. It is within the second phase, concept and viability, where the feasibility is conducted, communicated, and decisions are made based on the feasibility. Lastly, the key involvements include the QS that conducts the feasibility, the developer that interprets the feasibility and makes decisions based on it, and then of course the feasibility report itself. The focus of this study, however, is the perspective of the QS. The literature presented various issues with economic feasibility studies in QS practice, including inconsistency, neglect, it's problematic, it lacks standards, often overly optimistic, and poor cost estimation, including manipulation of numbers and misleading the clients. Because feasibility studies support significant investment decisions and is also deemed as a critical success factor for construction projects, it is critical to get it right. Therefore, the objectives of this study is to identify the actants in the economic feasibility process, specifically from the quantity surveyor's perspective, and also identify the relationships between these actants, and to, in the end, illustrate the actor network and to give a holistic view of the process that can support recommendations. The actor network theory forms the theoretical lens of the study. The heart of AND is the concept of a heterogeneous network of both human and non-human actants of aligned interests. Non-human entities can include inanimate objects, processes, concepts, objectives, etc. Actant is often also used where the focus is more placed on the act instead of the entity itself. In this study, we prefer to use the word actant. Translation is the process that explains the gap between the actants and can be divided into 4 separate processes. And the black box concept is a simplification method where the actor network can be condensed into one single actant. A prominent use of AND is to examine a network of actants in order to address issues in the system, where the stability of the network directs the capability of the solution. Hence, in this study, we firstly want to understand the network, and then secondly, identify issues in the network that destabilize the network. The main components of a feasibility study is presented on this slide. A total of 23 quantity surveyors in the commercial sector in South Africa were interviewed, and a thematic analysis followed. The graphical presentation of the network can be seen on this slide. The main objective of this actor network is to give and receive correct advice in terms of economic feasibility of a proposed construction project. Hence, the QS and developer form key actants of the network along with the economic feasibility study report. The empirical data gathered is from the perspective of the quantity surveyor, a key actant. The literature review in combination with the interviews presented actants that form part of the actor network. The 2 data sources are deemed complementary in the mapping and interpretation of the feasibility actor network. The QS as the source actant impose on the objective by their perception of a successful feasibility, which should be aligned with the developer's view of a successful feasibility. Some QSs do recognize that the success of the study is dependent on the parameters set by the developer. Another perspective of a successful feasibility is that it is only deemed successful once the project is completed within the constraints of the study. Some argue that the success is directly related to return presented by the study. An additional perspective is that the feasibility should be accurate and honest. irrespective of the predicted return. A final perspective is that the study is deemed successful once the project has been approved. If the perception of the QS do not align with the developers, the QSs try to convince clients that every scheme is a good scheme, and it's not always the case. Given that various perspectives exist in the QS profession regarding what constitutes a successful feasibility, it is imperative that the QS's perspective is aligned with the developer's perspective to work towards the same goal. Further to the QS being the source actant, the QS is responsible for compiling the report and requests input from the professional team, from financiers, as well as the municipality. In turn, the input from the professional team enact on the objective by the level of completeness of the input and being cost-conscious as a team. If the team is not cost-conscious, often tension would arise between the QS and the design team. Similarly, the input from the municipality affects the objective by giving an honest and trustworthy estimate of the expected rates and taxes. Unfortunately, however, municipalities in South Africa seem to change their rates and taxes once the building is in use, causing a significant decrease in return. Additionally, the input from the financiers influenced the objective by honouring the forecasted interest rate when they were initially approached. The QS decide on the contingency based on their perceived risk in the project. The contingency, however, needs to remain proportional to the total project cost to avoid overthrowing the potential investment. The QS level of expertise impacts the QS by early exposure of the required knowledge. The QS level of expertise is deemed the source actant due to the knowledge reaching the QS instead of the QS finding the knowledge. The expertise level is imposed by the mentor of the QS by allowing the inexperienced QS to get exposure to feasibilities. Nonetheless, in the industry, it is often seen that there is a delayed exposure to feasibilities and a reluctance of knowledge sharing. Furthermore, the QS level of expertise contribute to the objective by means of the compilation process. Irrespective of the expertise level of the QS, the time available to compile the feasibility infringe on the objective by means of the compilation approach and estimation method. Other participants expressed their concerns about the rate per square method of estimating. While the QS is compiling the feasibility, project-specific complexities need to be accounted for to contribute to the objective. The complexities that manifest in a feasibility are the type of income stream, operational costs, and projects done in phases. External actants that impose on the success of a feasibility is the exchange rate, inflation rate, and market. If the exchange rate, inflation, and market remain stable or favorable, the negative impact is mitigated. Moving to the developer-QS relationship, the developer approaches the QS to receive advice in terms of the feasibility. The relationship is translated through an appointment or an agreement with the QS. However, in South Africa, the compilation stage of the feasibility is often done as risk work. Furthermore, the professional fees have been decreasing lately. Both the aforementioned factors motivate the limited time that the QS profession is willing to spend on the compilation of a feasibility, which in turn negatively affects the quality of feasibilities. As part of the feasibility process, financing needs to be sourced, investors need to be attracted if required, and tenants need to be signed up if it's a rental scheme. The developer approaches financiers and investors with a preliminary feasibility with the aim to source funding. The financiers acts on the success of a feasibility by granting funds. The investor contributes to the success of a feasibility by investing. Additionally, the investors and financiers have requirements in terms of the presentation of the feasibility. In a rental scheme, the developer needs to sign tenants up and usually use preliminary feasibility study as a negotiation medium. The tenants impose on the success of the feasibility by signing the tenant contract. Once the feasibility is compiled, the QS presents the feasibility to the developer. The developer, with the right knowledge level, interprets the feasibility. In the industry, however, developers have various levels of knowledge when it comes to the feasibility. Additionally, the developer's level of knowledge impacts the approach the developer takes in the feasibility process, and this approach becomes a source actant and influence how the QS must present the feasibility. In conclusion, the modeled network creates the opportunity to identify issues in the network or where the network can become unstable. The feasibility network is complex and consists of many abstract concepts. Furthermore, the developer's perspective, being a key stakeholder, should also be investigated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rolien. Can you come up to the presenter status so we can see you? It would be lovely. Thank you. Great. Yeah, yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, that's great. Yeah. So, are you too in South Africa?
Yes, I am. Lungie is actually my colleague. The previous presenter actually
contacted. I thought you might be very closely connected. Yes, that's good. Yeah, there might be some questions about risk too coming in. But have we any questions, Vivien?
None in the chat box, no.
Would you like to ask one?
Sure. So I would like to ask you about the nature of the network itself. So you have attempted to identify how actants relate to each other, and you've mapped it out as a network, haven't you? And you then also in the conclusion section talked about a further exploration so you can get a more holistic network. So my question, since you have decided to employ ANT, I say ANT, employ ANT, I would like to ask, what is your view on, or whether you have come across Latour's view on the holopticon. So he talks about the impossibility of seeing a network holistically because we are always subjective. Do you have a view on that?
So the ANT actually, or ANT has actually quite a few different viewpoints. In the paper, I actually specifically say why I'm using my viewpoint. So I haven't used Latour's specific view per se, because I wanted to focus on trying to present the actor network so that we can identify issues. So where the network falls short or destabilizes, if one actant, let me call it, falls flat, the whole system collapses. So that was my whole objective to try and achieve. One of the comments that I had was, why not just mention the factors, because it's all, you can also call them factors that has an impact on the feasibility studies. But why I want to use the actor network is because I want to place it, all the factors, want to place it in the network to see how it influences the other factors and how it's being influenced, and then it becomes actant and it falls part of the whole network. And I think it was also Latour, he also sees the network as it doesn't necessarily follow the logic of a train network for argument's sake. A railway system, that's also a network. So it doesn't necessarily follow the logic of concrete networks. And there's a lot of abstract aspects that also has an influence in how the system works. For example, I was specifically talking about the perception of a successful feasibility study. So yes, the goal is to have a successful feasibility study, but if you as QS have a certain idea of what a successful feasibility study is, and your client has a different idea of what a successful feasibility study is, that misalignment in the perception alone can also derail your actor network. So that was kind of the approach that I was taking.
Sure, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. That clarifies the approach that you are taking and helps me to frame your research, helps me to understand your research rather within that framework. Perhaps just a follow-up question then from me. You mentioned you identified different types of actants. You had focal actants, target actants, and source actants. And each of them then went through the what you identified as the translator, right? So can you just explain that a little bit more? What are the differences in characteristic, perhaps, in those three different types? Why have you made those distinctions, and how?
Okay, so the translator is what links the two, the source actant and the target actant. And the source actant imposes on the target actant. The source actant is doing something that imposes on the next one. And the translator is linking these two together. So that's kind of how the whole network is put together. Does that make sense?
It does. So you're saying that from an actant from a source characteristic through that translator then becomes the target actant. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Excellent. I don't want to hog the floor, so I just want to open it up in case other people have, because I can go on forever.
We've got a question in the chat. Please. From Quadwell. Yeah. How do you determine the boundary or boundaries of the network of actants in the analysis?
So I try to work with specifically the compilation process and what goes into the feasibility study and what directly impacts it. So I've kind of used that as the boundaries and work with that as and that's how I've compiled the network, as you could see on the slides. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, boundaries are always very difficult but important issues on things. Maybe if I can ask a question. Really, I couldn't see the difference between an actor network and maybe a systems diagram, an influence diagram. How do you see the actor network theory adding to just a normal systems diagram? Or being beyond that, giving you more information, more insight?
For me, it's about the translating process. So what is linking the two different actors? That's part of the whole process. So for me, the difference comes in with the translator. The whole translating event of it, as well as the black box concept. So the actor network theory has the black box where they can, so each of the items that I've listed, either in a box or a circle, that can also be, if you zoom into that can also be unboxed into a system of its own. And also, you can take the actor network that I've presented, you can zoom out, and that can you put in one little box as well. So that concept makes it easier. So the more complex things that I'm not going into detail, I put in one little black box, and the concept that I am zooming into, I can actually explore and expand. So that's what I like about the actor network theory.
Right. I was wondering whether you were looking at any of the non-human actors, like the meaning of numbers or the significance of the feasibility study in itself as an actant in it. People use it as an individual item that has power on its own.
That would be interesting. So if you look at the significance of the feasibility study itself, I did also interview the developers, but for this paper, I only used the quantity surveyors input. From the developers side, I also gained interesting information about the significance and what they use it for and what the underlying meaning is for them. And to expand the whole network, I need to bring in the QA, the developer perspective together with the QS perspective, and then the things like the significance of the feasibility study will also be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting angles that you can do in the future. Yes, we look forward to hearing what happens then in your next analyses. Okay, I think we've come to our time, and as I say, the next event's at 4 o'clock. So can I thank Eleni, Lungie, and Rolien for their presentations and attending today. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being a participant, and Vivien for moderating and helping us through this session. So best wishes to everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all next year.